Dave Weiner, I feel like a new immigrant in this blogger world where you're a kind of founding father. Walk me around it. And I'm not talking about the technology. I want to know what kind of democratic experiment this blog idea really amounts to.
Well, gosh, it changes all the time. I mean, when we first started doing this, it was just a bunch of people sort of writing "Hello World" and being amazed that it was possible to do that. And then the next step was recognition of other people and say, wow, there's somebody else doing this, and learning how to communicate. And gosh, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it is what you make of it. Everybody brings something different to it and different set of expectations, and everybody molds it to be whatever it means to them.
But it's getting beyond this sort of what I had for breakfast or the color of my nail polish or exactly, arguing about the technology. I'm interested in the degree to which it liberates new social, political, expressive energy.
Okay. Well, before we had weblogs, before we had the web, information, entertainment, everything really, all that we did was very centrally distributed. So, if you wanted to have other people hear you, you had to impress a talent scout and an executive at a movie studio, and you had to rise through the ranks and become a star. And by the time you did that, there really wasn't very much of you left. What the web does is, and this has been a sort of a steady process that's been going on for 30, 40, 50 years, is the steady decreasing cost of distribution for thinking, for creative works, for ideas, for all kinds of art, for all kinds of writing. And with the personal computer came the desktop publishing revolution, and the ability, cheap laser printers replaced, $1 million printing plant with, with $100,000 worth of equipment. And then price just kept dropping until the point where you could start contemplating publishing on a very, very small scale. And that process has been inexorable since then, and the web drove the cost down even more, to the point where publishing is virtually a free thing at this point. I mean,
this is what I call undoing A.J. Liebling, the idea that freedom of the press belongs to every man who owns one. Now, you can buy it for $500, but is it working that way?
You can buy it for even less. I mean, it literally doesn't cost anything now to publish. It costs so little that it virtually is nothing. So the question is, what do you have to say? And even that isn't that important, because it's, if you're looking for a piece of information today, you expect to find it. I mean, 10 years ago, before the web had caught on, if you're looking for a piece of current information, generally the expectation was that you wouldn't find it. Today, that's flipped around, and you sort of expect you will find it. And the reason for that is because the publishing has gotten so easy, and people who have information want to share it. That's just the human impulse. And we have really good search technology for finding the things that we're looking for. And of course, we hope all this is going to get better. But the knowledge of the human species is increasing at just an outstanding, incredible rate now. And we're way outside of we've made so much progress in the last 10 years in this area.
Okay, I want to ask you the rude political question, which has to do with the Bush administration and the war in Iraq. It seems to me we've never had less debate, less dissent, more confusion, more general mass deception about what we were getting into than we've had in the last 6 months or a year since 9/11. It has not been an explosive period of expression, comment, criticism, investigation, democracy, in short. What's missing?
Good question. I don't really know. I mean, one would think that all we needed was the mechanism to enable that, but it sure didn't seem to happen. Personally, I asked all those questions at the time as we were starting the war, and got a lot of flack from people in the United States, and people in Europe, though, were quite supportive of an American asking those kinds of questions. But we didn't get any answers, and so sort of the hope is that at some point, not only will the technology be there, but the human spirit will be there as well, to get that information into our hands. There are some areas where having the publishing technology in the hands of the people has made a difference, but for the large part, on things like that, people still, where clock is turning backwards in that area at this point.
Let me ask, though, I mean, are we waiting for a shoe to drop? Are we waiting for something to kick in? Are we waiting for what your friend and mine, Jim Moore, calls the second superpower to speak? I mean, there were a lot of people in dissent around the world. They did use the web as their medium, and yet we also have a fairly impervious, we have a more than Teflon resistance to this kind of opinion. Will this wave of web opinion and commentary keep rising, do you think?
Well, you ask a very, very tough question, and very few people even have the nerve to ask that question. And as you're asking it, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I'm just a programmer, and I kind of, I shirk away from that really, really big question. I mean, are we looking at a societal upheaval? Well, if you were to ask it that way, I would say, of course we are. There's absolutely no question. But at that level, I don't know. I've also noticed as a business person that it's not enough for a business to decide to be open about its process and direct with its customers and competitors and so forth, that the customers have to be ready for it too. They can't punish vendors for being truthful about their end products. Yet I find that in a lot of cases, the customers really don't want you to tell them the truth because they were raised on this idea that companies never admit to being wrong. A president that stood up and said, well, I did lie to you about weapons of mass destruction, and I apologize for doing it. Now what's done is done, and in the future I promise that I won't do this anymore. That president would not get reelected. So can we handle, it's like Jack Nicholson said in A Few Good Men, one of the classic Jack Nicholson lines all the time. Tom Cruise says, do you want the truth? Tom Cruise says, I want the truth. And then Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. Of course, I don't do that very well, but Jack Nicholson does it much better. The question is like, are you really ready for it? I mean, people kind of, the way the press works now is that if they catch you in a lie, they go crazy and say, well, we caught the guy lying. But what's even worse than catching a guy lying is catching him telling the truth. They can't handle that. That would be unprecedented. So, one of the things that's going to happen, probably, if we survive, is this thought that we're going to be able to not just get information about silly, trivial things like baseball scores, and of course, anybody will let you find out what the weather is. But do you want the truth? Do you want to actually know what's happening? And I have to ask myself the question, do I want the truth? Do I really want to know for a fact that our government, knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq?
This is interesting. You raise the question, you raise another point. You say, I'm a technologist or I'm a programmer, but you also have a social vision and politics. Who are these folk out doing the blogs? What kind of neighborhood is this? Would you want to introduce them to your mother? Are they right? Are they left? Are they techies? Are they visionaries? What kind of place is this blogosphere?
I'm going to give you the hackneyed, predictable answer: is that they're as diverse as humanity is diverse. I mean, yeah, you've got all kinds of people. You've got people. I probably would be happy introducing almost all of them to my mother. I mean, they generally tend to be. We're talking about early adopters now. They tend to be well-educated, basically decent people. There's certainly some behavior that you see that people almost certainly wouldn't do or say the things that they do and say in the weblog space if you met them face to face. Somebody wouldn't come up to you and say, well, we'll say the kinds of things that they sometimes say about other people, so we can, it sort of makes it a not very pleasant place in some ways. And then there's some people that you meet through blogs who are, very inspiring, very interesting, teach you new things, that's where the value is in it for me. I mean, that's what I look for, is I look for people who are great writers. Maybe I don't even really care what they're writing about, just they have a really beautiful way of expressing themselves. I like that. And then they have some information or some ideas or just sort of a way around them that I find attractive, and it helps me explore myself, and I like that.
Okay, we'll come back to that. You're interested in blogs in the New Hampshire primary of 2004. It's only a matter of months away. What do you hope to achieve in politics with blogs?
Oh, that's really simple. A real election. I think the last presidential election sort of was, I hope, was sort of the running out of a trend that, it couldn't have come any closer to being a tie. That election was, in any statistical measure, was an absolute flat-footed tie. And that sort of tells you something. It's how successful the centralized political system has become at making sure the candidates say absolutely nothing. They fight for the center, they stand for nothing, and they both sort of both did an incredibly good job of never actually saying anything, and it became strictly a matter of whose personality you preferred, and turns out it was actually equally split. So the goal in enabling the citizens of New Hampshire, but not just that, but the citizens of the United States, the voters of the United States, is that they could dig in a different way and the candidates and learn about them and teach the rest of us about them. And the stories that came out would be different. It would be harder for the candidates to hide. It would be harder for them to stand for nothing. If they stood for nothing, that would be the news story. It wouldn't be sort of like reporters finding tiny little subtle, pseudo differences between the candidates and reporting on that as if it were news. There's too much buy-in on the press's part of the meaning of the system as it currently runs. It has no meaning. There has no integrity. It isn't what it appears to be. And when we vote, we're not really voting for what the founders of our country expected that we would be voting for. They expected we would be making decisions when we vote, but we're not making decisions. What we're doing is we're simply voting on personalities. And so the hope is that by arming the citizens to be their own press, that we will get a real election this time.
Every man and woman in New Hampshire, his or her own blogger, commentator, pundit, interviewer, broadcaster.
Sure, I think that would be wonderful. I mean, my philosophy, I'm not a member of any party. I feel like I'm a member of the Dave Weiner party, and I make decisions about everything. I have policies on everything, and I think that's kind of our obligation as a citizen to be thinking. And, in an ideal America, as the founders envisioned it, as Thomas Jefferson envisioned it, I imagine, we would all have our own personal newspaper, radio station. We would have our own platform for speaking, and there would be a constantly evolving, changing situation that one week, Andrew Sullivan would be the guy everybody's listening to, and next week it would be Scott Rosenberg, and then the week after that it would be Glenn Reynolds, and then Mark Pilgrim. I mean, it should be it should be a more fluid situation. Peter Jennings, maybe he doesn't have anything more to say. I don't know. Dan Rather, these are the people that brought us to the election of the year 2000. It was a disaster for us, and so out of that disaster, I hope we can reclaim our electoral system.
I hope it's your turn, Dave. But how will we know at the end of 2004 whether we've won?
Well, I think we're going. First of all, I'll say we think we are going to win, and we had a long discussion about this at Berkman Center, and I came to the conclusion that we would know that we won if we elect a blogger, if we elect somebody who has a weblog. And so far, the results are very encouraging. I mean, Howard Dean has a weblog and has done phenomenally well with the web, and is teaching the other candidates something that, hey, Chris, if it doesn't happen in 2004, it's going to happen in 2008.
When you say a blogger wins, you don't mean just a device or a person with a web edition. You're talking about an expressive person who can talk and write across a range of questions, reveal himself in prose. Is that the idea?
Close. It's more subversive. It's a person who goes direct, who circumvents the big media institutions and goes direct to the citizens and solicits their vote and engages in a conversation with the voters, and plays is the wrong word. he or she participates in the process. Today, the voter is seen almost as an afterthought, but the voter's not. The voter is the process. And so the candidate who runs a weblog and uses that weblog effectively to be a politician is going to be a very different breed of politician. And we're on the cusp of it now. I mean, all you have to do is read about Howard Dean and watch to see how the other candidates react to him, and to see how puzzled they are about this phenomenon, and to see that this is a process that's been repeated over and over and over again through all kinds of professions, where the people who are armed with the best communication tools run circles. I mean, you can see that here at Berkman. The people who use blogs, I mean, I may only see you once a week, right? But if you read my weblog, you have a pretty good idea what I'm thinking about, right? And vice versa. So we're communicating in a whole different level. And so the politician who does that, the one who wins, is going to be doing that. Yes, he'll be using the technology, but and he or she will be a good writer, but only because it's necessary to communicate.
This is fascinating. I watch not only the candidates coping with Howard Dean, I watch the media coping with Howard Dean, including Tim Russert and the New York Times, and they don't know quite what they've got here.
Right. Well, good. Maybe they'll adopt some of the techniques. I mean, a lot of times people have told me that, I'm threatening to those people, and I suppose that the words that I say sound threatening, but there's absolutely no reason why Tim Russert couldn't adopt the technology himself and encourage other people to use it. There's no reason the New York Times couldn't embrace it. And in a way, the New York Times is flirting with it, and sort of, touching it in its various different corners to feel the temperature and sort of get a sense of what it's like. But they're being very tentative about it because, well, for whatever reason, it's a scary concept to change the way you work, right? It's always scary. It's probably the same way that it scares me to think of the possibility that our whole society would be turned upside down by this. That's a little bit rich for even a guy like me, to contemplate. And then if somebody's built a whole career on an assumption that the information flow is centralized, well, it's a hard thing to give up. It's a hard thing to get rid of. Of course, that's why we have new generations coming along, and for them, the internet is a fact of life, and there's absolutely nothing strange about it to them.
Dave, call this the start of a continuing conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris.